If you grew up in the church or really anywhere in the world, you may have heard that the Bible condemns homosexuality.
What?
But what if we've been reading it wrong? This video is looking at Romans chapter 1. Ready? Hey, I'm Jim. I'm a real-life pastor and an amateur runner, and this video is a part of a series where I'm looking at all the verses that people tend to use to condemn homosexuality and showing that that's not what the Bible says. This video, we're in Romans chapter 1. We've done the Hebrew scriptures for the past couple weeks. Now we're into the Christian scriptures, and Romans 1 is often looked at as Paul's definitive statement against homosexuality. But, yeah, you knew there was a but. That only happens when you read a couple verses and ignore the whole context. That's kind of the theme in these videos so far, isn't it? Let's get into it and let's talk about why context matters. Let's start with this. Homosexuality is not a sin. Okay, I know some of you are already going to the comments to tell me why I'm wrong and why I'm a false prophet and why I'm going to hell or something like that. And others might be thinking, really? How can that be true? But I want to learn more. Okay, this video is for you. Let's keep watching. Let's start by reading the two verses in Romans that people often like to clobber queer people on the head with. Here, take a quick look. This is what they say. All right, you might be thinking, okay, Reverend Jim, how are you going to talk through this one? Well, once again, it all comes down to context. Let's talk about why context is so important. Imagine you're 2,000 years in the future reading a history book and it has two phrases in the same section. One of them says butt dial and the other says booty call. And these 2,000 years in the future historians are looking at this ancient text and they're saying, see, at one point in the 21st century, English-speaking people use this same phrase to mean the same thing. Because, I mean, if you just look at the words, it looks like they're saying the same thing. Butt dial, booty call. Okay, back to the present day. I'm pretty sure you recognize the difference between these two phrases. Butt dial and booty call do not mean the same thing. And the only way you know that is if you understand the context. So when we are 2,000 years removed from something, we might not implicitly know the context as much as we'd like to assume we do. What does this have to do with Romans chapter 1? You got to know the context to know if he's saying butt dial or booty call. Okay, he's not actually saying either of those things, but it's a metaphor. You get it? So what's the context of Romans? Well, we've got a hint right there in the name. It's a letter to Romans, to people who live in Rome. It's worth pointing out that this is probably Paul's least personal letter because he's never met them yet. He's writing this letter before he shows up. Typically, the other letters we see in the Christian scriptures that Paul wrote, he had been there first, helped start a community of people following the way of Jesus, and then he wrote letters to address some problems that were coming up. But this one is different. This is Paul sending a huge letter, his longest letter. That's why it's the first of all the epistles. They're in order of longest to shortest. And so he's covering a lot of big theological issues. And he starts in chapter 1 talking about homosexuality. No, not really. He starts by talking about idol worship. Idol worship is the context of Romans chapter 1, not homosexuality. What? Now, in this first chapter of the letter written to the Romans, Paul is making a theological argument about what happens when you turn away from worshiping God and turn towards worshiping idols. The same-sex behavior he describes in this chapter is a symptom of pagan idolatry. It's not the subject of some moral commentary. Also, it's worth pointing out that in the Greco-Roman world, where Paul was writing to, same-sex acts were common in temple prostitution. So that could be the context that Paul's writing about here. He's talking about what's going on in that pagan idolatry space and how that is not what it means to follow the way of Jesus. Paul's not writing some review of Brokeback Mountain or giving a commentary on Pete Buttigieg's life. He's talking about a specific time and a specific place, a specific context. Remember, butt dial, booty call? Context is kind of a big deal when it comes to reading something that was written 2,000 years ago. And when you just think about it a bit more, we realize that Paul had no concept of sexual orientation. That was not a framework for their world the way it is for ours. So Paul's not writing this as some commentary towards queer people. Paul's writing to heterosexual people who were behaving in an unnatural way as part of their pagan idolatry. Yeah, does that blow your mind? Because it kind of blows my mind. What it comes down to is this. Paul was not writing a policy statement on same-sex relationships. He was writing about the spiritual collapse of a culture who had abandoned God. And so reading Romans 1 as a commentary on a queer person's committed relationship means you have to read it entirely out of context. Remember what we said about context? Booty call!